The envelope was the exact color of the icing I use for wedding cakes, and it was sitting on my bakery counter at 5 in the morning, propped against the register like it had been waiting all night. My mother's handwriting was on the front. Not the mother who taught me to fold butter into dough until my arms ached. The mother who gave me away for being a girl. They gave me back like a sweater that didn't fit, and 20 years later, they wanted the receipt. I thought one payment would make her disappear. 40 grand and a signature. But what she actually wanted couldn't fit in a checkbook, and by the time I understood that, she was already sitting in my parents' kitchen. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where we sit with the quiet, complicated stories of women who finally learned where the door is and how to close it gently. If a story ever makes you feel a little less alone at your own kitchen table, drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I didn't touch the envelope right away. I turned on the ovens first because that is what you do. The bakery smelled like yeast and cold sugar, the way it always does before the sun. I run a place called Kinney's, on the corner of 3rd and Maple, and I own it outright. Which is a sentence I used to practice saying out loud just to believe it. My name is Adele Kinney. I am 31 years old. My husband Marcus builds furniture in a shop 2 doors down, and most mornings he brings me coffee before either of us has said a word, because he knows I don't have words until the first tray is in. Our daughter Nora is 1. She has 8 teeth, and a laugh that sounds like a hiccup, and when I hold her I understand, all over again, why I never went looking for anybody. My parents, Don and Hank, sold me this bakery for $1 and a promise to keep their sourdough starter alive. They are not my birth parents, they are the ones who stayed. Dawn's heart has been giving her trouble lately. Little flutters the doctor watches, and Hank pretends not to worry by rearranging the flower bins. I stayed late 3 nights that week because the Hendricks wedding needed 4 tears and nobody else could pipe the roses right. And because, if I am honest, some part of me still believes that if I am useful enough, everyone I love will have a reason to keep me. I wiped down the counter and looked at the envelope again. The color of joy. The wrong handwriting. I told myself I would open it after the roses. I did not open it after the roses. Here is what I know about the people who made me, which is almost nothing, and I built a whole life on that nothing. I was 3 years old when they signed me over. Old enough that I have one memory, or maybe just the ghost of one. A woman's hands buttoning my coat too fast, a car door, cold vinyl against my legs. Dawn told me the truth when I was 10, because she believed lies rot a family from the inside. She said my birth parents had wanted a son and could only afford to raise one child well, so they chose. She did not soften it. She just held my hand, while I did the math no child should do. When I was 11, a woman called our house once, asked for me by a name I didn't recognize, and then never called again. Dawn cried in the pantry where she thought I couldn't hear. That was it. That was the entire relationship, 1 buttoned coat and 1 phone call until this envelope. 20 years of a closed door I had stopped checking. I used to imagine, when I was younger, that they had regretted it, that somewhere a mother was crying too. Then I grew up and stopped imagining, because imagining is a bill you pay with your own peace. I taught myself to bake instead. Bread doesn't care whether you were wanted. Bread just needs warmth and time and someone paying attention, and I could give it all 3. I got good enough that people drove from 2 counties over for my croissants. I built a family that chose me back. And then, one Tuesday, the color of icing showed up on my counter, and the buttoned coat feeling came back like it had never left. I opened it at 9 after the morning rush, in the back room where the mixer drowns out most feelings. The paper was heavy, the kind you buy to seem serious. Her handwriting was neat and looping, the handwriting of a woman who wanted to be seen as gentle. Dearest Ada, it began, and my stomach dropped through the floor, because nobody has ever called me Ada. That was the name on a certificate I have never held. She wrote that she thought about me every single day. She wrote that God had put me back in her heart. And then, 3 paragraphs in, wrapped in so much velvet I almost missed the blade, she asked for $40,000. Not for herself, she was careful to say. For your brother. His name is Bradley, and he is 19. And he has such promise, and college is so expensive now, and family helps family. She underlined family. She signed it, your mother, Vera, as though the word were a fact instead of a thing you earn. I sat on an upturned bucket and read it twice. $40,000. to a woman who once decided I was the affordable one to let go. I noticed my hands were steady, and I noticed. Because steady hands at a moment like that means something in me had already gone quiet and careful. She wanted money. That part was simple. But she had signed it with the name she gave away when she gave me away, and that told me the money was only the doorway. She wasn't asking me to help her son. She was informing me that the account she'd opened 30 years ago was, in her mind, still open. And she had come to make a withdrawal. My first answer was no. It came up clean and fast before the guilt could get its shoes on. I am not a woman who folds because someone signs a letter, your mother. I called my friend Priya on my lunch break because Priya is a paralegal and because she tells me the truth even when it costs me a slice of pie. I read her the letter in the alley behind the shop, standing next to the dumpster with my apron still on. She was quiet for a second. Then she said the thing that should have set me free. When an adoption is finalized, Adele, it legally severs the whole relationship. They are not your parents in any way the law recognizes. You owe them exactly nothing. No money, no explanation, no reply. She let that sit. I remember watching a delivery truck idle at the end of the alley and thinking, so that's it then. It's over. I could throw the letter in the dumpster 3 feet away and no court, no God, no signature could touch me. Legally, I was a stranger to Vera Kingsley, and strangers don't get $40,000. But Priya knew me, and after a beat she added the sentence that undid the whole clean feeling. Legally, sure, she said. But you and I both know that's not the account she's trying to collect on. I didn't answer. Because she was right. And because the account Vera meant had no laws protecting it. Only the soft, stupid, hopeful part of me that had spent 20 years wondering if a mother somewhere cried. That part didn't care what the law said. That part was already reaching for a pen. I wrote her back that night, at the kitchen table, with Nora asleep and Marcus pretending to read. I kept it short and kind, because kindness is the boundary I could actually hold. I told her I was glad she and her son were well. I told her I had a full life and a family, and that I would not be sending money, and that I wished them the best. I did not sign it. Your daughter. I signed it Adele. Then I found the number the letter had come from, the one she'd written at the bottom so I could call to arrange the transfer, and I blocked it. Marcus watched me do it. He is not a man who tells me what to feel. He just put his hand over mine on the table and said, "You don't owe that woman a single thing. And if she comes at you, she comes at both of us." I believed him. I slept that night like the door had closed. I want to be honest about the part I'm not proud of, though, because you came here for honesty. Even as I wrote the refusal, another voice in me was already doing the arithmetic. 40,000 was a lot. It was also, for a woman who had clawed her way to owning a building, survivable. And if one check made the guilt stop, if one payment let me be the good person, the generous one, the one who rose above, then maybe it was worth it just to be done. I almost wrote that check just to make the guilt stop. If you've ever paid for peace that never came, you already know how this goes. Stay with me. I mailed the refusal instead. And the next afternoon, Dawn's phone rang. Dawn called me at the shop, and her voice had a thin thread in it I hadn't heard since her last cardiologist visit. A woman had phoned the house, she said. A woman she didn't know, asking for Ada. Dawn had said there was no Ada at this number, and the woman had said, "Oh, but there is. She just goes by something else now, doesn't she? And how is the bakery doing?" My hand tightened on the pastry bag until the seam split. Vera had our home number. Not my cell, which I could block. The house Dawn and Hank had lived in for 30 years. The number in the old phone book. The one you can find if you know a last name and a town. And she knew about the bakery. I had told her nothing. I had blocked her. And still, she was reaching past me, through me, to the people I would burn the whole building down to protect. I kept my voice level for Dawn's sake, told her not to worry, told her to hang up if the woman called again. But when I set the phone down, my heart was doing something ugly and fast. Because a stranger who accepts a no goes away. A stranger who circles around behind you to find the softest people in your life is not asking. She is measuring the walls, looking for the window someone left open. I called Marcus. Then I did the thing I do when I'm scared, which is get very organized. I made a list of everyone Vera might reach and everyone I had to warn. It was a short list, and every name on it was a name I loved, and that was exactly the problem. That evening, I did some looking of my own, because I would rather know the shape of a thing than be surprised by it. It didn't take much. Vera hadn't just found the home number. She knew I'd had a baby. She'd mentioned Nora's age to Dawn. Casually. The way you drop a fact to prove you have more of them. She knew the bakery had done well enough to expand. She knew my married name. None of that was public the way she'd have needed 20 years ago. Somebody had been feeding her. And when I laid the timeline out on the kitchen table, the thing that turned my stomach wasn't that she'd found me. It was when. The letter had come 6 weeks after Kinney's got written up in the regional paper. A little feature about the local bakery that quadrupled its wedding orders, with a photo of me holding a 3-tier cake and grinning like a fool. 20 years of silence. And then, the moment I looked solvent, the moment I looked worth it, a letter arrives, calling me dearest. I sat with that for a long time, because it meant the silence had never been silence. It had been patience. She hadn't forgotten me and then remembered. She had been watching, from a distance, waiting for the girl she gave away to grow into something worth coming back for. I wasn't a daughter she'd lost. I was an investment she'd deferred. The only question left was who had been sending her the reports. Because the article had my name but not my parents' number, and Vera had walked straight to the softest door in my life like someone had drawn her a map. Marcus and I argued that night. If you can call it arguing when two tired people love each other and disagree about how to be good. He wanted to lawyer up, send a formal letter, make it cold and final. I understood. But I kept circling back to the same soft place, and I could hear how it sounded even as I said it. If I give her the money once, I said, at least I'm the person who helped. At least I'm not the one who slammed the door. He looked at me for a long moment. Adele, he said. You already got a check ready in your head, didn't you? I hadn't. But I had gotten the pen ready. That was the thing I couldn't explain to him, because it lived under language. When you are given away as a child for not being enough, you spend the rest of your life auditioning to be enough. You overbake. You overgive. You stay late on the Hendrix cake. You keep everyone fed so no one has a reason to hand you back. And here was Vera, offering me the one audition I'd wanted my whole life, the chance to prove I was generous, forgiving, worthy, better than the people who'd discarded me. All it cost was $40,000 and the last of my dignity. I actually picked up the pen. Marcus didn't stop me. He just said, quietly, whatever you decide it because it's yours, not because it's the bill she thinks you owe. I put the pen down. I didn't write the check that night, but I didn't tear it up in my head either. And Vera, 3 hours away, seemed to know it, because 2 days later the second envelope came. The second envelope was the same cream color, and this time there was a photograph inside. A boy, 19, standing in front of a brick building with his hands in his pockets, half a smile, the kind of smile a person gives when someone else told them to smile. Bradley, my brother. The word landed strange in my chest, because I'd never had a sibling, and here was a stranger with my birth mother's chin. Vera's note was shorter this time, and sharper for it. She wrote that Bradley didn't know she was reaching out, that he was proud and would never ask, but that he was the family's hope, the one who could make something of himself, and wouldn't I want to be part of that? He needs you, she wrote. Your brother needs you. She had learned, in the space between letters, that a plea for herself bounced off me, so she'd swapped ammunition. She put the boy in front of the money like a shield, because she knew, the way predators know, that I would not fire through a child. And it worked. A little. I looked at that half-smile for a long time. But I have piped enough wedding cakes to know the difference between a bride's real joy and the smile she puts on for the photographer's count of 3, and Bradley's smile was the second kind. Then I turned the photo over, because I turn everything over. It's a baker's habit. You always check the bottom. On the back, in different handwriting, was a return address. Not Vera's city 3 hours away. A house 1 county over from mine. The address of my mother's cousin. My Aunt Marlene. I had met Marlene exactly twice, both times by accident, both times through Dawn, who kept a loose thread of contact with my birth family's side the way you keep a spare key you hope never to use. Marlene had always seemed like the neutral one, the aunt who sent a card at Christmas and asked no questions, the border town between 2 countries at war. And her handwriting was on the back of a photograph my birth mother had mailed to break my boundary. I sat with the 2 envelopes side by side on the table, the cream, and I felt something in me change gears. Up to that point, I had been reacting, blocking numbers, warning Dawn, arguing with Marcus, playing defense against a woman 3 hours away. But defense loses slowly, and I had a daughter now, and I was done losing slowly. If Vera had a map to my life, I wanted to see who'd drawn it. So I made a decision that felt, at the time, like taking a breath before going underwater. I would stop guessing and start finding out. I would call Marlene, not to accuse, just to listen, because people who think you don't know anything will tell you everything. I picked up the phone before I could talk myself into a softer plan. Marlene answered on the second ring, warm as ever. "Oh honey, it's been so long, how's that beautiful baby?" I asked her gently whether she'd heard from Vera lately. There was a pause. A small one. The kind of pause a person takes when the true answer and the safe answer are fighting in their throat. And then Marlene said, "Well, you know how she frets over you. I keep telling her you turned out just fine. I send her the little updates so she stops worrying." She said it like a kindness. She had just handed me the map, and she thought she was doing me a favor. I kept my voice soft, because a soft voice is a fishing line and I wanted the whole story. "Updates," I said. "What kind of updates?" And Marlene, relieved to be talking, let it all spill. "For years," she said. "Since you were a teenager, really. Vera would call and ask how you were doing, and I'd tell her what Dawn told me. When you got into that baking program. When you and Marcus married. When the shop opened. When little Nora was born. She just wanted to know you were happy," Marlene said. She never had the nerve to reach out herself. I'm the one who kept saying she should. I listened to a woman describe, in the voice of someone recounting a good deed, how she had spent a decade as a pipe running my private life to the person I'd been protected from. Every milestone I'd earned, every door I'd built, reported back like weather. "She's your mother, Adele," Marlene said when I went quiet. "Blood is blood." And there it was. The whole machine in a single tidy phrase, said by a woman who genuinely believed she was the gentle one. She wasn't cruel. That was almost the worst part. She thought family was a debt that overrode any door you tried to close, that a mother's want automatically outranked a daughter's. No, that the two of us were a misunderstanding she could sweetly fix by keeping the information flowing. I thanked her. I didn't yell. Yelling teaches people you're the problem. Instead, I asked her, as evenly as I could, to please stop sending Vera anything about me or my daughter. There was a silence on the line, hurt and confused. The silence of someone who cannot understand why you'd turn down a favor. "Oh," she said finally. "Well, if that's what you want. But honey," and here her voice dropped, kind and terrible, "you can't really stop your mother. She's already decided." Cutting Marlene out cost more than I expected, and I want to be honest about that too. She wasn't a villain. She was the last thin thread to a whole side of me I'd never gotten to know. The aunt who might have told me stories about grandparents, about where my hands came from, about whether anyone else in that family woke before dawn to bake. When I asked her to stop, I felt the thread snap, and I stood in my kitchen holding a dead phone, a little more alone than I'd been that morning. This is a thing nobody tells you about protecting yourself. It doesn't feel like winning, it feels like subtraction. Every wall you build to keep the harmful people out also keeps out the maybe good ones standing behind them, and you don't always get to sort the crowd first. I lost an aunt that afternoon. I gained a locked front door. On paper, it was a fair trade. In my chest, it just ached. Marcus found me still standing there and didn't ask what happened, just started dinner, because he's learned that sometimes the kindest thing is to fill the room with the smell of onions and let a person come back to herself. Over the stove, he said one thing. "She warned you, didn't she, that Vera's already decided?" I nodded. "Then decide back," he said. "Not louder. Just first." It was good advice. I would spend the next several weeks failing to take it, because Vera, having lost her pipe, did not slow down. She did what people who see family as property do when the quiet channels close. She stopped writing letters, and she got in her car. I drove out to Dawn and Hank's the next Sunday, the little blue house 4 blocks from the bakery, to do the thing I'd been dreading, which was to make my elderly parents afraid on purpose. I sat them down at the same kitchen table where I'd learned to crack eggs one-handed and told them everything. The letters. The money. Marlene. I told them that a woman named Vera might come to their door, and that if she did, they should not let her in. Not even to be polite. Not even for a minute. Hank got quiet and stern. the way he does when a machine breaks and he's already fixing it in his head. But Dawn went pale in a way I didn't like, one hand drifting up to her chest, and she said, "Adele, honey, is this going to be all right?" In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from her. I hated Vera in that moment more than I had for any letter, because I was watching a woman with a fragile heart absorb a fear she hadn't earned, and I could see her working to be brave for me even as her color changed. I got her a glass of water. I stayed too long. And I noticed, only later, that Dawn had gone unusually quiet when I mentioned that Vera might call the house again. She hadn't said, "That awful woman," the way I expected. She looked down at her hands. At the time, I thought it was fear. I told myself to let it go, that my mother was tired, that I'd frightened her enough for one afternoon. I should have asked what she wasn't saying. But I was so busy building walls that I didn't notice one of them already had a crack. The bakery saved me that week, the way work does. There is no room for a spiraling mind when 40 dozen dinner rolls need to be out by 4. Hank came by to help, because he can't stay away from an oven, and we worked the morning shift side by side the way we had when I was 17, and he was teaching me that patience is just love with a timer on it. Around 10, in the lull, he wiped his hands and said the thing I've kept in my apron pocket ever since. "You know why we kept you," he said, not looking at me, looking at the proofing dough. "It wasn't because you were easy. Lord knows you weren't. It wasn't because you'd amount to anything. We didn't know that yet." He turned the dough. "You don't get kept for being useful, Adele. You get kept for being ours." I had to go into the back for a minute. I ran the water and told myself it was the flour. Because that sentence went straight to the wound Vera had reopened, the one that told me every day of my life that I had to earn my place, that love was a bill, and I was always behind on it. Hank had just handed me the opposite arithmetic offhand, wiping his hands like it was obvious. "You get kept for being ours." I didn't have the words yet to understand how much I would need that sentence. I just knew it belonged to me now, that Hank had given it to me the way he gave me the bakery, quietly, for $1 and a promise. I tucked it away. I would need it at a long table 3 hours from here, sooner than I knew. She came on a Thursday. I know it was Thursday because Thursday is my quiet day, and quiet is what let me see her. I was frosting a batch of lemon cakes near the front window when a car I didn't recognize parked across the street, one of those clean sedans that people buy to look established. A woman got out. She was in her late 50s, in a coat too nice for our little downtown, and she stood on the far sidewalk looking at my shop the way you look at a house you used to live in. I knew her before I knew her, the way you recognize your own chin on a stranger. Vera. 3 hours she had driven, 180 miles of highway, to stand across the street and study the building I'd built. She didn't come in. That was the part that iced my spine. She just looked, for a long minute, at the gold letters that spell Kinney's on the glass, at me behind the counter with a piping bag in my hand, and something moved across her face that I couldn't read and didn't want to. Then she got back in the car and drove away. I stood frozen with the lemon cake half frosted. But she hadn't come for nothing. An hour later, Dawn called, her voice shaking, to tell me a woman had just left an envelope in her mailbox. Cream-colored, not for Dawn, for Ada. Vera had driven 180 miles, looked at the daughter she gave away, decided not to speak to her, and instead delivered her demand to the door of the woman who'd raised her. She wasn't going to ask me. She was going to go around me. And she'd found the one door I couldn't afford to leave unguarded. I caught up with her before she reached the highway, because our town is small, and there's only one road out past the feed store. I pulled up beside her sedan at the light and rolled my window down, and for the first time in 28 years I looked my birth mother in the eye. Up close she was softer than the coat, tired around the mouth, and when she saw it was me, her whole face rearranged itself into something warm and practiced. "Ada," she breathed, like a prayer answered. I said, "My name is Adele. And you need to stop going to my parents' house." She flinched at parents, just slightly, a card player who'd been read. Then she recovered and did the thing she does, the thing I'd only seen on paper until now. She made her voice gentle and laid a hook in every sentence. "I only want what's best for this family," she said. "I gave you a better life than I could offer, Ada, and all I'm asking is that you help your brother the way I made sure you'd be helped. I gave you up so you could rise. Don't you think you owe the family that gave you the chance?" The light turned green. A truck honked behind us. And there, in one breath, at a traffic light in my own town, Vera had said the whole thesis of her life out loud, calm as scripture. She had reframed abandonment as a gift. She had turned giving me away into an investment she was now cashing. I owed her, in her mind, for the very act of discarding me. I didn't argue. I just said, "That's not how it works," and rolled up my window. But as I pulled away, I caught her last words through the glass, and they were about my daughter. She'd called Nora her grandchild. "That's my grandbaby too," she'd said, just before my window sealed her off, and the words followed me all the way home like a smell you can't wash out. It shouldn't have shaken me. It was just biology, a technicality, the same technicality that let her sign a letter, "Your mother." But it did shake me, because it revealed the true size of what she wanted. She didn't want $40,000. $40,000 was the opening bid. She wanted back in. She wanted a standing claim on my life, my parents, my daughter, a permanent seat at a table I had built specifically so that people like her could never sit at it. That night, I sat on the nursery floor while Nora slept and let myself feel how tired I was. The specific exhaustion of holding a door shut against someone stronger than the lock. Marcus sat down beside me on the floor, too big for the space, and didn't say anything smart. He just said, "We're okay," over and over, until I could breathe. And in the quiet, I felt the old voice make its offer again, so reasonable, so seductive. "Just pay her. 40,000 and it's over. You can afford it. Be the bigger person." And I was so worn down that I almost decided to do it, just to make the whole thing stop, just to be the good one, and be done. Then my phone lit up on the nursery floor. It was the bakery's after-hours line, which nobody calls at night. My stomach knew before I answered. It was Hank. His voice was wrong. "Adele," he said, "your mother's in the hospital." I don't remember the drive to the hospital, only the parking lot, only running. Dawn was in a bed with wires on her chest and an oxygen line under her nose, small in a way I refused to accept, and Hank was in the corner chair looking a decade older than that morning. "A cardiac event?" the doctor said. "Mild. They'd caught it early. She'd be all right, with rest and no stress," and the doctor said the words "no stress" while looking at a chart, not knowing he'd just prescribed the one thing my family could no longer guarantee. Because when I finally got Hank alone in the hall, he told me what had happened, and I felt something in me go cold and very still. Vera had come to the house that afternoon after the mailbox she'd knocked, and Dawn, my Dawn, who I'd told 100 times not to open the door, had opened it. Because Dawn is polite, and because Vera had stood on the porch and said the thing that got past every wall. "You've had her 30 years, Vera had said. "I only want a little help for my son. You owe me the daughter you got to keep." She had gone to a woman with a failing heart and told her she was a thief, and Dawn, who had never once made me feel like anything but chosen, had stood in her own doorway and absorbed the accusation that she'd stolen me, until her chest seized and Hank found her gripping the counter. I sat by Dawn's bed all night. Near dawn she woke, found my hand, and whispered something I will hear for the rest of my life. "Don't let her take you from me," she said, as if I were the one being stolen. In the morning, when the light came gray through the hospital blinds, Dawn asked me to bring her the mail from home, the ordinary mail, bills and coupons, because ordinary is what a scared person reaches for. Hank had grabbed it in his rush out the door and it was still in his coat. He handed it over and there, in the middle of the electric bill and a grocery flyer, was the cream envelope. Vera's mailbox delivery. Addressed to Ada. It had ridden along by accident, and now it sat on my mother's lap in her hospital gown, this pale rectangle of another woman's demand, and Dawn's hand was resting on top of it, shaking, not from the envelope, just from being 71 and tired and hooked to a monitor. I looked at that. My adoptive mother's trembling hand lying over my birth mother's request for money, in a hospital, at dawn, and something in me finished changing that had been changing all week. Up until that envelope, I'd been fighting to keep my peace. Trying not to be the villain, not to slam the door, hoping there was a version where everyone stayed calm and I paid a fee, and it all went quiet. That version died on the blanket in front of me. Because I finally understood the shape of the thing I was fighting. Vera would never stop, and she would never come at me directly, because she'd learned I was strong. She would come at dawn. at Hank, at Nora, someday. She would keep aiming at the softest people I loved, because that was the only leverage that worked on a woman like me, a woman who'd built her whole self on protecting others. I took the envelope off my mother's lap so she wouldn't have to hold it another second. And I made a decision that felt like stepping off a ledge. I was going to drive the 180 miles to Vera's city myself. Not to pay. To find out what $40,000 was really for. Because whatever this was, it wasn't a boy's tuition, and I was done letting her write the story from 3 hours away. When she went after the woman who actually raised me, something in me went quiet and cold. If you've ever gotten calm in the exact moment you should have fallen apart, you'll understand what came next. I waited until Dawn was home and stable, 3 days, before I made the drive. Marcus offered to come. I told him to stay with Dawn and Nora, because I needed the house guarded more than I needed a passenger, and because some things you have to walk into with your own 2 feet. 180 miles is 3 hours of highway and a lot of time to talk yourself out of a thing. I didn't. I let the county lines tick past, the fields turning to strip malls turning to the gray edge of the city where Vera lived, and I rehearsed nothing, because I've learned that a rehearsed woman sounds like a liar, and I wanted to sound like the truth. I had one question, and it was simple. What is the money for? Not what she'd written. What it was actually for. Because $40,000 is a specific number, not a round wish, and specific numbers come from bills, and I wanted to see the bill. Her neighborhood was tidy and tired, small houses with big trucks, the kind of place where everybody knows whose son did what. I found the address from the letter and parked across the street, the same way she'd parked across from my shop, and for a second I understood her a little, the pull to look before you knock. Then I got out. And before I could reach the door, it opened, and a teenager came down the steps carrying a duffel bag, tall and unsure, with a chin I'd have known anywhere because I